History doesn't usually remember the names of those who almost changed everything. We remember the victors, the conquerors, and the fallen. But in the sweltering summer of 1778, the fate of Europe rested on the shoulders of one man, Maximilian von Wittelsbach. He was a prince of Bavaria, a man of sharp intellect and even sharper ambition. He loved the arts, he studied the sciences, but more than anything, he believed in his bloodline. But Bavaria was a powder keg. The aging Elector, Maximilian III, was dying without an heir. And in the 18th century, a vacant throne wasn't just a family tragedy. It was a dinner bell for the wolves of Europe. To the north, the iron-willed Frederick the Great of Prussia watched. To the south, the formidable Empress Maria Theresa of Austria waited. Caught in the middle was Maximilian, a man about to make a decision that would either crown him a legend or brand him a fool. Bavaria was teetering. As the Elector's health failed, the air in the court of Munich grew thick with the smell of old wax and fresh secrets. Maximilian knew that rightful claim meant nothing without military might. He began his move in the shadows. He wasn't just looking for allies, he was building a web. He moved through candlelit chambers, promising gold to the greedy and glory to the proud. He whispered in the ears of the nobility, undermining his rivals with the grace of a seasoned assassin. But you can't keep a secret from the great powers. In Vienna, the Habsburgs were already carving up the map. In Berlin, Frederick the Great was sharpening his bayonets. They didn't see Maximilian as a sovereign, they saw him as a complication. The rumors began to spiral. To some, he was the savior of Bavarian independence. To others, he was a reckless conspirator draped in aristocratic allure, willing to burn the house down just to sit in the big chair. The tension snapped when a secret emissary arrived under the cover of night. He bore a wax-sealed ultimatum from Empress Maria Theresa. The message was clear: yield, stand down, let the great powers decide Bavaria's fate, or watch your kingdom vanish in the smoke of 100 cannons. Maximilian was trapped. If he yielded, he would be a puppet, a footnote in history. If he stood firm, he was inviting the two greatest armies in Europe to turn his home into a graveyard. He retreated to his study. Outside, the autumn leaves were falling like discarded spirits. Maximilian picked up his quill. His hand, usually so steady, trembled. He looked at the parchment and saw visions of a red blood sky, men in steel plate clashing in the mud, the screams of horses, the smell of sulfur. He didn't just need an army, he needed a miracle. He reached out to the radical factions of the Bavarian court, invoking a call to arms. He was gambling with a currency he didn't have: the lives of his people. December 1778. The ground was frozen. The world held its breath. A final, desperate summit was convened. Representatives from Prussia, Austria, and the German principalities gathered in a room so cold you could see their breath. These were the men who moved borders with a stroke of a pen. Maximilian entered the room. His heart was beating like a war drum against his ribs. He stood before the steely-eyed Austrian diplomats. They didn't see a prince, they saw a nuisance. They laid down their demands with the cold finality of an executioner's axe. For days they argued. Debates turned to insults. Threats turned to the sound of boots marching on cobblestones. Maximilian realized he was losing the room. He did the only thing a desperate man can do. He went to the people. He took to the marketplaces of Munich. He used his commanding presence to ignite the crowds. "A free Bavaria!" he shouted. The people roared back. For a moment, he felt invincible. But that night, the adrenaline faded. Maximilian walked alone along the banks of the river Isar. The water was dark and unforgiving. He looked at the reflection of the moon and realized the crushing weight of the crown he so desperately wanted. He was threading a needle between peace and total annihilation. Was he the hero, or was he the spark that would burn Europe to the ground? He had signed the treaties, he had made the promises, but the wind was shifting. The nobility was divided. Some stayed loyal to his vision of independence, while others, terrified of Prussian steel, began to slip away into the night. The end didn't come with a glorious charge. It came with a declaration. Prussia declared war. But this wasn't the war Maximilian had imagined. It became a grueling, freezing stalemate, a conflict so defined by supply lines and starvation that history would mockingly call it the Potato War. Maximilian's dream of a swift, glorious ascension evaporated into a gripping nightmare. The very alliances he had built with noble intent became a noose around his neck. Bavaria survived, but it was fractured. The Wittelsbach house was scarred by the cost of his ambition. Maximilian had sought to claim his destiny, but instead he became a cautionary tale. He proved that power has a price that is rarely paid by the person wearing the crown. Decades later, the whisper still echoed through the halls of Munich. The story of a prince who reached for the sun and brought back only the winter.